What's up, guys? It's your boy Frank the Tank from the Podheads web show, here for another edition of Sessions with the Podheads. I'm in the cipher with my very best buds, as usual, JB Perez and Making C Money.
Yeah.
And we're here with our very special guest, Nate Jurewicz from Christians for Cannabis.
What's up, Nate?
What's going on, guys?
Welcome to the cipher. Thank you for being here, by the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if this is the first session you're watching, we explained it on the last. We just like to do interviews with interesting people who mean something to the cannabis community, and that's why we're here with Nate Jurewicz. Basically, Christians for Cannabis. He's an advocate for the use of medical marijuana and also educating people in the religious community about cannabis. Ultimately, it's not as bad as we think, right, Nate? Talk to us a little bit.
Yeah, I discovered medical marijuana 2 years ago. I didn't really realize that, I was raised in the church. I'm a pastor's kid, was always kind of taught to stay away from weed. It's a gateway drug, all the same stuff. And when I, became enlightened to the fact that it was an actual medicine, and I started doing all this research of figuring out why it was made illegal to begin with, I realized that the single biggest demographic of people that were voting against cannabis-related laws and legislation were the evangelicals. Yes, someone that grew up in the church. I can remember, the guest pastor coming to give their testimony and telling everyone, as soon as I found Jesus, I stopped smoking the weed. The devil's lettuce.
The devil's lettuce.
Yeah, and right now, I go to a very conservative Bible college, good people. But, when some of them find out what I do, that I'm the founder of Christians for Cannabis, I get some dirty looks, or this thing will come out of them and just go, and just start yelling at me. And it's just like, whoa. Wow. So there's definitely, and it's not that they're bad people. They're just misinformed. And when you have a pastor of a church that has that much authority, that's looked up to, is everything that they're saying is literally
the word of God.
The word of God.
Yeah.
It's a very authoritative. It's a lot of unprogramming that needs to be done. And I don't want to speak out against those pastors, because we got to remember that they were under all that propaganda in the early 80s. This is
as well, right?
This is your brain on drugs. I learned it from watching you, Dad. They were all under that stuff. They didn't have the internet back then, so they just did the best with what they could. They're good people, and I'm not saying that they were necessarily wrong, but they weren't totally
it's misguided, essentially. But let's talk about Christians for Cannabis real quick before we get too deep into this. Let's introduce who Nate is really quick. Nate, tell us about. You said you go to Bible college and that you are the son of a pastor. But tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about Christians for Cannabis, and ultimately your mission. How'd you get into this?
Well, I smoked a lot of weed.
And that's how it happens.
With an idea like Christians for Cannabis, you're going to have to smoke a lot of weed to come up with an idea like that. Mm-hmm. But, all kidding aside, I gave my life to Jesus when I was 4 years old, grew up in the Baptist denomination, and have excelled in, went to private Christian school, homeschooled in high school, so I was like that sheltered kid that everyone knows, not allowed to listen to secular music, that kind of thing. Come from a good family, born in Minnesota, moved to Tampa, Florida when I was 6 years old. I'm 37 years old now. And, I take medical marijuana for two reasons. Number one is I have a back condition, spondylolisthesis. So I basically have a clenched fist in my lower back all day.
Oh, wow.
So I live in pain. And then the other thing is I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder 5 years ago. I've been in and out of psych wards, on the psych unit, told by the psychiatrist, take Abilify, Depakote, Decadron, lithium, had all weird spiritual experiences, and then just started to really go deeper into the things of God 5 years ago, and was delivered of the bipolar disorder. But to manage it, I have found that medical marijuana does keep me a little bit more balance, to be quite honest. And the body high gives me pain relief, so I'm not turning into some zombie that gets addicted to opiates. And
Absolutely. I bet that has to be kind of the double-edged sword with people who have mental illness in religion. You have some of the archaic thinkers who say, well, if you pray enough, you'll be cured. You have some of the others who, well, modern medicine, well where do you find the line in between? And it seems like you're speaking a little bit on that.
Yeah, like right now, if for the evangelical Christians or Catholics listening to this right now, that maybe you're a little bit too afraid to even talk about this subject among people that you go to church with because you feel like it might be okay. I have like old ladies from my church. They kind of know what I do. Word's gotten out by now, and they walk up to me and they look to the left and they look to the right. And then they're like, okay, I need to know about this whole medical marijuana thing. How do I get my card? I need to find the right doctor. And it's hilarious. But the church's stance, has always been either it's a gateway drug or it's for like the spirit-filled, charismatic, Pentecostal, prophetic, apostolic denominations of Christianity. They'll say, oh, it opens up doors to the demonic. And, I'm well-versed in theological views across all denominations. And, I've just come to find that there's a different way of how do we look at this? What does the Bible say about this? So I have a background in digital marketing. I used to hold real estate investing seminars, sold millions of dollars worth of information products and how-to products on the internet. So I just took my skill set and decided, okay, well, I'm just going to start out on Facebook and start educating people just organically about, if you are a Christian, how as a Christian should we handle this controversial subject, and how should evangelicals handle this? Because whether we like it or not, it's here. It's going to be legalized. It's already legalized in 30 some odd states. We're going to have full legalization soon. So how should we handle that? And that's number one, is to educate the religious community that come from more conservative, more Republican backgrounds of, how should we handle this and what does the Bible actually say about this? So that's been goal number one. And goal number two, and really this is actually more important, Christians for Cannabis has given me a platform to preach the gospel of Jesus to the stoner, hippie, stoner culture. Last I checked, there were not a lot of tie-dye shirts showing up in church. And when you talk to most people that are in the weed community and you tell them you're a Christian, I can tell you, I don't always get the responses that you think I would get. They feel judged by Christians. They feel like they can't talk about this. They feel guilt and shame for using cannabis because they think it might be a sin because their pastor said that it might be a sin, but they just kind of do it anyways, and they just don't kind of know. They're just like, oh, whatever. So I've ministered to a lot of people that are coming from that perspective, and they've just felt so much relief because they don't have to carry around that guilt or that shame caused by religion. Remember, Jesus was killed by religious people. So religion is not really a good word. I say that because that's culturally what we recognize church as religion, but I consider myself to be a follower of Jesus. I don't consider myself to be a religious person. So it's
an important distinction as far as the church is concerned, because you mentioned the church's stance and you talk about what the Bible says, or a follower of Jesus. So I think that's the next point that I want to ask is, what does Jesus say? What does the Bible say about weed?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would do is I would open up the Bible. So I got a Bible right here. And if we were opening it up to the very, very first page in Genesis.
The first fucking page. Right? Like, it's
I'm telling you right here, guys.
Very first page.
Right.
It's actually the first chapter. It's actually the third page on my Bible, but most Bibles, it's more or less first page. Sure. Genesis 1:29, and God said, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seeds, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed to you shall be for food." So the Bible said, God has said, "I've given you all herbs and seeds." It doesn't say all herbs and seeds except for cannabis. And then some people get hung up. It's like, well, it says you can eat it. It doesn't say that you can smoke it. So it's like, so let's really ask, like, what are we really saying? If we look at what Jesus, if we dropped off Jesus in the Garden of Eden, what would he actually say? I find it very hard to believe that he would say, okay, guys, listen, my dad, who knows everything, didn't realize you guys were going to figure out how to smoke this shit. So as a direct result, we have to get rid of it, outlaw it, we have to lock up people, we have to throw them in cages, and we have to lock up more black people than white people. That just doesn't sound like something Jesus would do. You know, we're always asking, what would Jesus do? You know, well, what would Jesus do about weed? You know, based on the fact that Genesis 1:29 says all herbs and seeds. It doesn't say all herbs and seeds except for cannabis. You know, that's a hint of what Jesus, you know, might do or might not do. But then you might have some Christians which may have some kind of rebuttal. They may say, oh, well, that's Old Testament. Selectively, if you're in a theological debate with any Christian, there's a couple of rebuttals they can always come up with. They can always say, well, that wasn't the context of that verse. So if you disagree with anything, they just say, oh, that's not the context, and then you just make up the context.
Well, that's a big issue with the Bible, especially because it's interpreted so differently by so many different cultures, so many different people. I mean, people you have used it, so you can just kind of like meld the words to mean what you want in some cases. Like, I think that some people have talked about how people are taking things way too literal in the Bible. Some people have said, well, you have to understand the language from back then. So how do you, when you look at this and you interpret the language, how do you see it, and how are you sure that what you're thinking is accurate?
I do believe that I personally do believe that the Bible is the Word of God, but I also know that because it was originally written in Greek and Hebrew, when you translate it into English, there are certain words that don't translate. So like in the Baptist denominations, you'll have a lot of people that are like King James Version only Bible. Like, if it's not King James, then that's not the Bible. Well, the King James Version was published in 1600. And if you look at the King James Version that was published in 1600 and you go to the bookstore, Bible bookstore, and buy a brand new King James Version, it's not even the same thing either. Wow. So that's not even a good argument. And also, there is a verse in Exodus referring to cannibism, which is spelled with a K. And a lot of people do think that cannibism was the healing anointing oil, and it's the same thing as cannabis. But if you go and you look up that verse in Exodus, in a modern-day King James Version Bible you buy off the shelf, cannibism's not in there. So there's people changing our Word of God. And
exactly my point.
But let's say that you're a Christian and you're like, okay, well, Genesis, that's Old Testament. A lot of times you'll get rebuttals from Christians saying, okay, that's Old Testament law. Okay, and that Jesus wasn't actually in Genesis. He didn't come on the scene until New Testament. So let's go New Testament, and let's open up to Matthew 7. There's a verse in Matthew chapter 7 where Jesus warns of false prophets, saying, you shall know them by their fruit. So what does that really mean? Like, what is a false prophet? A false prophet is someone that is knowingly deceiving people. So I'll ask a lot of Christians in casual conversations, and I'll ask them, do you know why weed was made illegal to begin with? And every single one of them will say, no, I don't know why. And I'll simply respond by saying, in the 2,000 years of church history, since Jesus has ascended in 33 AD, and there's no evidence either before the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD or anything after that in all the wars, there's no evidence of Christians looking at people that are using cannabis and condemning them and telling them that they're going to go to hell or that they're in sin, that they're sinning or anything like that. There's no evidence of that at all. It wasn't until about 80 years ago that you had a false prophet named Harry Anslinger. Now, Harry Anslinger represented people in the paper industry. So paper grows out of wood. How long does it take to grow a tree? A long
years, decades, sure.
Right. The people in the paper industry, they didn't want to compete against hemp because the crop could go much faster. The Declaration of Independence is written on hemp paper. The Constitution is written on hemp paper. There's this shroud that they think they found that actually...
Shroud of Turin?
Yeah, was also made out of hemp.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he basically represented people in the paper industry. They needed to come up with a good reason to outlaw this plant so that they could make more money, making paper. So they started all this propaganda saying that black men, Spanish men are more likely to rape white women if under the influence of marijuana.
Reefer madness.
Reefer madness. They changed the name of it from cannabis to marijuana because it sounds more demonized. So by a biblical definition, I would classify Harry Anslinger as a false prophet because he was knowingly deceiving people. And what is the fruit of that decision and that act? Well, since then, the private prison system and the pharmaceutical companies have all jumped on board, buying off all of our politicians to keep this plant illegal. And if we look modern day, what is the fruit? In the states where we have a medical program in place, crime goes down and death by drug opiates goes down. In all the states where full recreational is in effect, crime goes down and death by drug opiates goes down even more. So that is the fruit. So if we look at what Jesus actually said, warning of false prophets and the fruit, I cannot see how any Christian that actually knows about this history in his right mind can say that, oh, absolutely, it's a sin and we have to outlaw this plant completely. Now, in the defense of on the other side of the argument, if we look at the whole Bible, there is a verse that does say to be of sober and sound mind.
Okay.
But you can't take that one verse and build a whole theology out of that and outlaw the plant completely.
Exactly.
Completely.
But Nate, let me talk to you a little bit about, you mentioned the church, you mentioned reaching out to people. What kind of response, or as you talk to us, what kind of response have you gotten from your church? Has it been mostly good? Has it been mixed? Do you have Christians for Cannabis? Is there a big following starting to build up? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So we have 23,000 followers on Facebook, and we've got several viral videos from me speaking in front of city council meetings, or there was one video on our Facebook page where I actually approached a street preacher that was at the first Cannabis, which was then called Hemp Fest, that was screaming at people and yelling at him, and I confronted him on Facebook Live and had a friendly debate, and the video ended up getting 112,000 views, and he packed up his stuff and left.
Wow.
Most people that hear Christians for Cannabis is mostly positive, especially if you're a millennial Christian or younger. If you grew up in the church, you're afraid to tell your mom, the Sunday school teacher, or your dad or mom that sings in the worship team, or you grew up in the church and your parents have very strong religious beliefs. You're afraid to tell them that you actually are for weed. But when you find out that there actually is a Christians for Cannabis organization, it's like, oh, wow, I want to tell all my friends about this. I want to tell all my Christian friends that I've had debates with this on a regular issue, so they love it. Even we have atheists and agnostics that don't even believe in Jesus. They're like, okay, finally, here's a Christian that isn't so judgmental, so they love it. But every once in a while, I will get people that are just set in their ways, and it's usually people that knew someone, or like a lot of these pastors that found Jesus and used to live a life of drugs. If weed was part of that drug life that led them into cocaine and led them into other things, I could talk to them until I'm blue in the face and they won't get it. This religious demon will literally come out of them and manifest and start speaking to me. They're not even aware that it's even there, honestly. And there's not really much I can do other than respond with, I can just feel the love of Jesus all over you. It's just so effervescent as it's just coming off of you, because they don't really understand and maybe can't get their head wrapped around the fact that when our culture has legalization, it's way less likely to be a gateway drug, because the legal market's not going to upsell you to cocaine like the black market is. And all the people that you hang around with, in those the early 80s, 1984, when the commercial, the anti-drug commercial, when the dad busted the kid with weed and he said, "Who taught you how to learn this stuff?" And he said, "I learned it from watching you." That's study that those anti-drug commercials actually caused more kids to smoke pot, because it gives something to rebel against. That's because our sinful, rebellious nature. God told Adam and Eve, don't eat the apple. What do? They eat the apple.
The drug on war is exactly that.
But you know what? You're right, too. It is a fact that if you legalize drugs or do this medically, this, that, and third, crime goes down, suicide everything goes down. It's a fact.
People like opiates. Think about it. You got vets that are getting off of opiates, and why would opiate deaths go down? Because people that are too afraid. Let's say you got pain, you got PTSD, You got some kind of physical thing. You got to take a painkiller. The doctor says you take a painkiller. You're going to take a painkiller. Well, you could take weed. Well, weed's not legal. I'm not going to buy it from the drug dealer at the dorm. I'm too afraid of that. So people that are too afraid to break the law will just listen to whatever the genius MD tells them to, and then they get hooked on it, and then they die. So it would make sense if you have an alternative natural herb that's never killed anyone ever, to take that instead of a painkiller, that opiate deaths would go down. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure that out. You don't have to be a sociology professor to realize that. This is common sense stuff. This is very, very simple.
Nate, have you ever been baked and just get like surprised, basically get surprised by maybe a Bible study group, or maybe mom comes home with some ladies from the church and you're just like baked out of your mind at the wrong time? It's happened to me, and so I was just curious.
Everyone knows that I'm Christians for Cannabis, so it's not like a big secret or anything like that. I actually put on a church service at a weed festival, and I got a very well-known conservative Pentecostal church to help me put on the church service.
Wow.
But they weren't necessarily agree with my stance on weed. These are good people. I just made the agreement. It's like, well, this gives me a platform to preach the gospel to the stoner hippie crowd, which the church isn't reaching, and they were on board with that.
That's got to be difficult. It's a very uncomfortable place to be. And just me speaking personally, I went to Catholic school for like 2 years. I was raised Roman Catholic. But
That's interesting.
But I never really talk about it because I'm not a very religious person. I mean, on my dog tag it says Roman Catholic. So if I would have been killed overseas, I'd have probably gotten those kind of services, even though I don't necessarily consider myself that way. But I remember how uncomfortable it was to talk about certain things in front of like the more devout Christians or Catholics. I remember one time when I was in high school, I just left from a buddy's house, and I'll try to keep the story quick. We got baked. I mean, I got so high. I'm walking up the cul-de-sac and just happened to run into my friend who's with his parents, who is very, very much Christian. He worked at Christian bookstores. Everything he did from his job to his extracurricular activities was about the church. And they happened to invite me to dinner. And I sat there big. I mean, my eyes were bloodshot. Plus, I know I smelled like a pound of weed. Right. And I sat there and had dinner with them. And totally, I remember I went to eat my food. They were like, hold on, we got to say grace and all this. So it was just the longest hour of my life, because I remember I just knew they were judging me and they knew I was high. And I was just like, oh, God, they're never going to let this kid hang out with me again. I could feel like literally like I'm growing horns on my head and shit. Like I was going to go to hell. These people were just going to cast me to hell.
You're only really supposed to correct and confront people of sin if they're an actual fellow believer that you actually have a relationship and you actually know. So just go out and just say, God hates fags, like Westboro Baptist does.
Yeah,
that's not even a scriptural thing as to how you're supposed to handle it. But with that being said, I don't go and get high and go hang around all my Christian conservative friends just to be a rebel and stick it to them.
Right, just to
Sure.
If you follow the teachings of Paul in the New Testament, he talked about culturally how to be more relatable to people. So there's like one verse where he says, if you're in the presence of a non-believer and they have you over at their house and there's a certain type of meat that you don't think you're supposed to eat, well, because it's against your religion, well, just eat the dang meat because it's more important.
Don't be rude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the relationship.
Wow.
I want to go out and influence, half of the country identifies as evangelical. So I want to go out and influence a lot of people in America. And if that means that I do some small part in passing legislation and also bringing cannabis to the church so that less people in church are not sending their family members to get some opiate that's going to kill them and it's going to actually get them real health care, then that's way more rewarding than the one uncomfortable encounter I have with some judgmental Christian that doesn't know scripture, doesn't know theology, and is just flat out deceived on the issue. But the church itself as a whole does need correction on this issue, on how they're supposed to handle this subject, and I'll go on the record and say that. I'll debate any theologian, any pastor, anytime, anywhere, on any station. recorded. I do not
Right
care.
here with the Podheads. So you heard it, right? Nate has put out the challenge. If you want to debate this, come to the Podheads web show. We'll facilitate that.
I appreciate that that you're unapologetic about what you're doing, Nate. I do. I like the fact that you say, "Look, man, I'm down to talk to anybody about this." I like the fact that you don't dance around the words. So definitely a lot of respect here, guys. You heard it. You heard it right here. Leave your comments. We want to know. We're not just looking for everybody to agree with what's going on. I think Nate can attest to that. So we want to know what you feel about these videos. We want to know what you think about today's interview. And comment. We're definitely going to be having Nate on again, of course. And like I said, he's down to debate. He's down to do anything. So make sure before we get out of here, one thing I want to make sure people know where to find you, Nate. How can people connect with you and Christians for Cannabis?
Let's go to whatwouldjesusdoaboutweed.com. They can also email me my personal email, which is nate@greenpeakmedia.com, nate@greenpeakmedia.com, or they could just go to whatwouldjesusdoaboutweed.com. That'll redirect you to our Facebook page, and then you could just drop me a message. Those go straight to me.
Nate, I want to thank you on behalf of the Podheads for helping us. Every one of these interviews, that's what these are all about. We're trying to break down the stigmas of the cannabis community, that we're all a bunch of potheads who don't get anything accomplished. So with owners of CBD companies, with people in the Christian cannabis community. So I just want to say once again, thank you for that. And definitely we'd love to have you back on again as soon as possible. Guys, it's always a pleasure in the Cipher with you guys sessions. I'm Podhead Frank on all social media. Check out the Podheads web show, our channel on YouTube. There's all kinds of content. It's not just the show. We've got all kinds of different segments, all kinds of different videos. And this, of course, is session. So for JB, C Money, K Strad, and Nate Jurewicz from Cannabis Church, this is Frank the Tank. This is Sessions, and it's been a great one. I'll holla.